reorganizing the policies and the institutions and equipping ourselves with new instruments and look, that's pretty good. And then by analogy, if you now look at the sort of the neighborhood in flames and the collapse of Europe, or the decline of European power globally, this is a similar sort of moment. And I wonder if that analogy really holds. Because just, and I wanted to hear from you, I don't think it hurts enough. We were talking about Ben earlier. I mean, all foreign policy types are immensely exercised about sort of the lack of ability to exert European influence in Ukraine or the neighborhood or on China or strategic choices elsewhere. But does it really hurt to the same extent as when the euro crisis blew out? And I think, just, I don't know if it, and it only if it does, will people jump over their shadows and break taboos and go into such a kind of direction that I think we would like. That's the first point. The second point is on the role of the member states and the institutions and the review and what have you. As everybody knows, the consensus in town and outside is that we're pivoting to the Commission and we're banking everything on this cluster. And again, I can see totally the reasons why people, beginning with the IREP, want to go in that direction. But I also wonder if that will not reinforce some of the things that you're agitating against, which is the technocratic approach and the lack of politics in sort of European foreign policy. And it requires really, I think, the EAS and ECFR type people to come out in a little bit in the lead, because otherwise it will be sort of a Commission takeover of the kind of things that I think we will not necessarily expect. And then the last point is on the strategic partners. Since it's sort of the moment that everybody has to confess to their failures. In an earlier phase, I was involved in some of these discussions, and I tried to make a distinction at that time, 5 years ago, between the United States and everybody else. I think, and I failed, of course, for all the political reasons. You can understand why such an idea would die in a bureaucracy. But I think it's still essentially the case. And I think with the others, what you need above all is a sort of a mentality of doing deals. A much more transactional kind of foreign policy, whereby you get to a more limited sense of objectives and link it to the leverage that you do have at the EU level. But if you want to get into a place like that, you need to get that through the European Council. It seems to me, because it's the only place that I can think of where you can link some of these things. So maybe for Nick and for Mark to respond to that.
Well, my sort of immediate reaction to Stephen's last point, and indeed to what Mark is saying about exceptionalism, is that, and this is going to sound dreadful because I haven't really formulated the idea properly, but I think we've got to get over the idea of, that we have European universal values which can brook no compromise and have to take first place in all our dealings with the outside world. Mark was talking about, well, what can we live with and what can't we live with, and I suppose one of the biggest challenges it seems to me that we face is to somehow try to arrive at a modus vivendi with Islam. And at the moment we don't seem to see any middle way between what I would call the sort of Blairite approach, which is that we're engaged in this secular conflict with extremism and jihadism and the global war on terror, and if that means that we have to embrace the Sisi regime in Cairo and we have to abandon all criticism of our friends and allies in the Gulf, that's the way we should go. We don't seem to have any middle position between, on the one hand, sort of totally banking on the secular, the guys who line up with the way we see the role of religion in the world, and on the other hand, what would the other hand be? A sort of complete indulgence of some of those things that we find quite difficult about the way Islamic societies are organized, the way they treat women, their attitudes towards gays. And the result is that because we don't really, as Europeans, want to go either the one way or the other, we end up going nowhere at all. and thus leave, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood, who are sort of half okay and half not. We can't make up our minds about them and hang them out to dry. So I think there is a lot of thinking we have to do about how we can work foreign modesty then with the more moderate aspects of Islam, but accept that the centre of gravity, the legitimate centre of gravity at the moment of most Arab countries is a sort of degree of social conservatism with which we are uncomfortable, which we wouldn't like to live under ourselves. That's just a sort of slightly inchoate thought.
Another question? Please.
Yeah, if I may add, first of all, I really appreciate this wake-up call that the Institute wrote. It's really very helpful, it's uncompromising, which is good at the beginning, that sets the record straight. I think institutions have to be honest towards themselves as well. The European Union and the different institutions are doing with the outside world is extremely fragmented. Indeed, doesn't have any strategy at all. I'm representing the European Investment Bank, and I speak from the example we have as far as we are active outside Europe, which we are because we are the financial branch of the European institute. It's all haphazard, fragmented, and based on legacy and incidents, with no strategy whatsoever. If we solicit for strategy, it's very hard to get. Of course, one has to take into account that civil servants in the European institutions, they're all, well, they work in an empire without a country. So they're very good in global public policies, they're very good in multilateralism, they're very good in the technical aspects of international relations, but their antenna for geopolitics, of course, is limited, because they're not working in a place where these sort of antennas are used. That leads me to the conclusion that if you accept this as a wake-up call, and if you do realize that you have to start again, and basically you have to start from scratch, because you miss out at least half of what's relevant in international relations when you're working in a country-less institution. If you have to start from scratch, that you really have to be self-critical as well when it comes to your way of working. And of course, if you look to 28 member states, they are fragmented as well. They have vastly different geopolitical antennas. Some countries discussing should we leave this whole European Union, others fleeing to Brussels to be rescued by Brussels. So, therefore, if we start thinking about strategic priorities, we have really to start from scratch. And I think things like these clusters where you were referring to could be helpful because it's also self-critical, it's realistic, because you accept that you can facilitate here to some extent. That you can help to regroup countries, but that you cannot design and execute a European foreign policy. Those who think that's possible are doomed to fail. So I think this wake-up call you wrote can be very helpful to get a more realistic debate and take the whole issue of geopolitics in international relations as a group more into account than Brussels institutions ever did in the past.
Does anyone want to respond, or should we move to the final question? You could take a question. And second from the front, please.
Yes. Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yes,
I should have made that clear.
Because I'm Andrew Duff. And I'd like to thank you all, Mark and your colleagues, for the paper. I think it is very stimulating. I have two questions. First, why did you not propose or consider, it seems, the abolition of the External Action Service? which to most of those, most of us in Brussels and in third countries seems to be still dysfunctional. And secondly, to ground things more in current realities, as you ask us to do, what salience do you put on Turkey? Because it seems to me that Turkey can be a prospective recruit for Mr. Putin, a prospective recruit for the caliphate, and a prospective recruit for Europe. And picking up Nick's theme of the problem of the West and Islam, Turkey could be the constructive channel, but for the European Union to take Turkey seriously, we have to propel the more progressive and constructive countries and forces, which include the Commission, to a position of leadership on this issue. And I'm certain that if we cling to the European Council, as we saw on Friday, the attempt to be more proactive and constructive on Turkey will be doomed to failure.
Who wants to stick up for the EAS? Nicholas.
Yes, I mean, it seems to me that the EAS does not need to be abolished, it needs to be cherished. And I imagine he's feeling a little, well, it's had a pretty rough ride so far, and it can't have helped morale to discover that the boss was upping sticks and moving across to the Berlin. But it does, wrong, good. But it's always seemed to me that, of course, the decision-making power in foreign affairs is going to rest with the member states very largely for the indefinite future. It's always seemed to me that the great thing the EAS could do and should do is agenda setting, getting people on the same page in terms of assessments and analysis. And that's a particular part of the EAS function of presenting the world as it is, or presenting the facts of this crisis or this situation or this region as it is in front of the FAC and the foreign policy community is the great thing that nobody else can do. And the more the EAS is enabled to do that, the happier I should feel.
Any comments on Turkey?
Oh, yeah, I mean, just quickly, I mean, I think Turkey is clearly critical too. I mean, I'm thinking particularly in the least perspective, its influence, its leverage, its link with a number of the crises going on is deeper than most. And one thinks of Syria in particular, where they've got border access, they've got the link with groups, but one also looks at the likes of Egypt and Libya, where again they've established deeper links than a lot of other countries. One thinks of what they did with Iran in the past and their attempt to try and broker a deal a year ago or a couple of years ago. So, I mean, I think that they're critical, they have to be brought into the loop. And I think it's also worth saying that they've been quite problematic in many ways. And one thinks of Syria, and fundamentally they do take a very different approach from that being pursued by the Europeans, by the West, and they've been very detrimental in terms of allowing some of these groups to grow. So I think it's a balancing act, and one looks at some of the internal dynamics, and there are questions of whether it's heading in the right direction. But as Nick says, in a sense, one has to be realistic about these things. Turkey is critical, it's in the neighborhood right there, and we probably have a better of a chance of dealing with Turkey than we do with a lot of these other countries. So we take what we can get.
Thank you very much. Fernando Anderson, from the European External Action Service. And I just wanted to reassure Nick that I think that as far as the move of the HRBP to the Berlin, I think this it was just stranger to have the only one of the members of the Commission not in the Berlin than to actually have them all there now. And that reiterates the point about working. So in a sense, for the cluster system to work, the President also needs to make it work. That's one other point I'd like to make. But also for this cluster system to work, I think that the HRBP also needs to take fully the advantage of the Foreign Affairs Council, which is what you will make very much agree with. Like others, I very much welcome this paper. It was very enjoyable. I think as far as the strategy question and whether or not we need to just restart from scratch, I'm not sure that that's the case. I think we basically know what we need to do, and we've known that for some time, and we need to adjust according to events, of course, if you like. But the point is that it's really about money and about political will in the end, whether or not we achieve this or that goal in this or that region, whether or not we need to readjust the policy, and that's what okay, so that contributes is what is the usefulness now. It's not to redo everything. With that in mind, I wanted to ask a question regarding the transatlantic trade investment partnership, which was mentioned by Francois. In admiration of the Americans, we've put it into a strategic picture. But isn't it strategic for us as well? Isn't TTIP beyond the economics, beyond what it can bring to us, for working jobs, also a strategic strategy, a policy that we're pursuing, which would achieve strategic goals for us by strengthening the EU-US relationship? And do we want to do this? I mean, I may be wrong. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't something that we want to do. But if it is, how is it that we can get the strategic significance better understood and better owned by member states? And I'm looking in particular to one member state that I think can probably get the most out of this, and it seems to be on the verge of losing a historic opportunity.
Yeah, if I should respond right away, I think that's right, and I think you're looking me at the wrong person, but looking at me as being from Germany. I think it is telling that the German TTIP debate, in terms of newspaper article generates, if you also include the German language media, 4 times as many articles on TTIP as the rest of the EU together. And you see what the intensity is. And interestingly, the argument you are making is not very prominent. And I think it is partly due also to the fact that we're probably also in the political class just beginning to think through the strategic dimension. Actually, I think a number of people have understood, and that I see gaining ground in the debate, that if we want to have, as Europeans, a word to say about norms and standards in the regulations and institutions governing or implementing those standards, then TTIP would be very helpful. If we can get the Americans to sign an agreement with us which kind of follows that sort of logic, we have a strong argument for other partners around the world. And I haven't thought it through myself, but the same argument goes for the investment protection dimension of TTIP, to say, if we can get this, then this would be the benchmark for investment protection arrangements in the world. What we haven't understood so far is how far would actually the argument carry to say that TTIP, under the circumstances of the day, is the one instrument that we have left to reinforce the link, kind of tying the United States to Europe's longer-term interests. In there, I think the jury's out, at least in my view, because I can think of kind of contradictory effects it will have. Will the United States be willing to honor a commitment and to honor the commitments in this global or this transatlantic marketplace at a time when it has a severe political conflict with Asia. How would we fare if in the U.S. view there's national security and then there's the TTIP commitments? If trade sanctions are used, companies are banned to do business with other countries. Under a TTIP agreement, my understanding is that would also limit the Europeans. So I think there are elements in there, in that strategic assessment, which we haven't fully thought through. And I think it would be part of a more strategic approach, like Nick was arguing, to foreign policy, if we would actually do that. We would ask ourselves, would TTIP limit our abilities to conclude agreements with other third parties that the United States may not have on their list as most preferred partners? And if that was the case, is it more important to maintain that freedom, or is it more important to link the United States? I hear in the debate more and more voices who say, let's try to kind of assess the negotiations and assess TTIP exactly on those points. Does it leave Europe enough space to particularly pursue its economic interests in other parts of the world? And does it do enough to promote our interests in kind of using what could be our last chance to write the rules? That's my interim answer to that.
Francois.
Just very quickly, some of the remarks on TTIP. TTIP is a wonderful thing because this is, from my point of view, what made China come to us for the free trade agreement. Nothing else convinced them that this might be useful, but the threat of the TTIP. The problem is we just can't be the weak side of the triangle, counting, leverage through us to others. We've got to think of several important issues. One of them, I'll prolongate what Joseph said, is about sanctions. Sanction or judicial or legal arbitration in its role to the treaties. We have to be fair to others, and others have to be fair to us. So we have to be, if we claim reciprocity with China, we have to claim some reciprocity with the United States. And that is very difficult in the area of TTIP. We run a risk that others, such as China, mirror what the US is doing, which is translating its own legal system directly to the international system by doing the same thing. This is what they are now starting to implement, leveraging big fines and so forth in some crucial areas. So we are, the TTIP initiative also almost binds us to have a doctrine unless we just accept the negotiating terms. When you talk about the digital economy, for example, this is absolutely huge. The other aspect is that with Asia, which is still the biggest trading partner, we don't have anything that comes close. Even Asians among themselves have something called RCEP, which is a kind of sub, a way to deflect some of the pressure of the TPP, to put up some honest competition to the American offer. We can't say our negotiations with India have gone very far, and even with Japan, although by itself one can argue that it's a mega trade deal because the Japanese economy is so large, the issues that are being discussed are not issues that reflect on the whole region. They're too specific to the Japanese economy. So I think, unless, as Joseph said, we bank that the Obama initiatives will fail and at some point just fall through, and the US is in its traditional system, if we bet that it might succeed, we need some kind of European initiative, and one in some areas takes the side of the others that claims more reciprocity on the part of the US. That will make us a much more convincing actor.
More questions? Lady.
Veronica Schock from SVP, German Institute for International Security Affairs. I have a question about the neighborhood policy, especially regarding the South. You say the neighborhood policy is too self-regarding and Eurocentric. And I wonder how far supporting civil society is one way out of that. I think you also advocated in your paper in one point and how it would fit this greater foreign policy strategy, especially in cases like Egypt, which was mentioned, where at least seemingly a stable partner, I'm saying seemingly, so I would be interested in your point of view in the region is a priority, and at the same time we seek to support civil society and democratization. So how, in the neighborhood policy or in country tailored policies, how do you see this challenge, and how could it be resolved in a more strategic way?
Nick, maybe you've been volunteered.
I mean, I think harking back to my rather inconclusive musings about how we can best resolve the question of our sense that our values are universal, but the fact that we are no longer in a position to impose them on the rest of the world, whether they like it or not. I mean, my own view, for what it's worth, is that the whole conditionality concept as played out through our response to the Arab Spring was unrealistic. Apart from anything else, it just lacked the muscle or the size of incentive. Neither sticks nor carrots were remotely big enough, and just encouraged regimes on the other side of the Mediterranean to game the system. I'm not sure that, dig myself in deeper, I'm not sure that the standard human rights clauses actually belong in free trade agreements. I think they're increasingly unrealistic. What I do think is that doesn't mean to say we should back away from our values. And I think things like support for civil society is something that we should be ready to double down on. I don't think we should conceal for a moment in our dealings with sub-Saharan Africa that we regard anti-gay legislation as ridiculous and archaic and uncivilized, and that we want to support anybody in those societies who is ready to campaign against them. Whether we should make that the stuff of our intergovernmental relations, I'm less clear about. Well, I'm doubtful about.
Okay. We only have a few more minutes, so if you keep the question brief, yeah, please.
Thank you. A few remarks, actually, and a couple of questions. I'll try to be brief. My name is Stiftung Mercator. I'm chairing the Maghreb working group on behalf of the ES. I myself come from the Italian diplomacy. I've been working there for 3 years. I think I've been in a kind of privileged position to see the debate inside the ES and among member states, at the bottom level, PC level, Foreign Affairs Council level, much less in the European Council level, because there is a gap, as a matter of fact, which is probably a problem we might have to look into in the future. And just to reply to my colleague that sees in the European Council more potential for the future, I doubt, because they have other priorities. They've shown this for many years now. The problem is who deals with the foreign policy. And there I come to the issue raised at the very beginning. In the past years, and I refer to the southern neighborhood, which I know better actually, member states, some member states, usually the usual suspects, have been filling the gap, or basically the void left by the EU. Well, I wish it had been like this more and better, honestly, because being inside and having followed from very close the political debate, the big challenges in the southern neighborhood since Arab Spring to yesterday, I can tell you that what we're missing is leadership, which means we are missing it from inside. That's, I think, everybody recognizes it since long, but also from outside. And there leads me to the real problem here, which is we need to recognize, particularly in the southern neighborhood, this has been a collective failure. And there are very good reasons for that. I mean, member states, which are supposed to push the foreign policy much more than the US, with due respect for my own institution, which I'm working, have been very shy and, of course, focused on many other different priorities than the foreign policy. And very reactive, by the way. We've been reactive for 4 years. We, I mean, the EU institutions and member states. EMP. Everybody is always known that this is a Eurocentric, bureaucratic instrument driving. But at the end of the day, 4 years ago, you know who pushed more the ENP and its instruments? They were member states, even more than the bureaucrats inside the Commission. So the first question is, do you really expect that we can reform ENP from within, from the Commission, or even the ES, without a new approach, strategy, and much more courage, of course, and resources by member states? I honestly doubt it. I look around myself. We remain very much in a crisis management, let's say, mode, and we try to react when the crisis comes up. I haven't seen any strategic approach in this for years. If we look at the Eastern neighborhood, I'm just an observer there. By my simple question as an observer was, how member states didn't see this coming? Because now we know what happened afterwards, but how come? Nobody saw it coming, and then exploding so fast. So there are many questions we should answer and be more honest to ourselves. This is not the EU endeavor. This is first and foremost a member states endeavor, and we know why we've been not unequal to the task. Mainly because in the southern neighborhood, mostly they are out of grasp. They are out of our reach. We should start from there. And we have many other priorities in our member states. And final question, which is very specific for those who prepared this paper. I read it this morning. I found it very interesting. I was, I wouldn't say surprised, but disappointed that there is no mention whatsoever of the Middle East peace process. They reference the southern neighborhood, what the EU could do there, just first steps for the HRVP, but nothing about that. Is it so basically hopeless? Is that your assumption? Or maybe it's less important? Why? Basically?
Thank you. Okay, brief answers first on member states and the neighbourhoods.
Can you quickly clarify what it was a long question? What's the...
It was more a remark, actually.
Yeah.
I was trying to reply to the original assumption that there is a problem with EU, ES/Commission, here in the way the foreign policy, the external relations have been taken forward for 4 years. And I was stressing that there is a problem, there was a problem, but this is an overall problem which concerns first and foremost member states.
Agreed.
It's not...
Let's say that. Let's say that.
It's not playing the lawyer for the ES. It's the other way around. I'm an Italian diplomat. And when I tell you, I would like big member states, small and medium member states, to take more of the lead and set more of the agenda, it's also because I'm recognizing we've been unable to do it. So it was more of a remark.
Yeah.
You have to look in capitals more than in Brussels. In 2 words.
Because why I found it hard to comment on is exactly I'm trying to think through the same issues, but it's not that easy. I mean, you need more leadership in a way, and leadership is hard to offer by the EU, especially when it's a crisis situation, because it's very hard for the EU to act and react in real time. It's almost excluded, and then it tends to be some sort of membership-driven policy that, by definition, is not liked by the institutions and many other member states who feel that they are not on board. And at the same time, that gives us our sort of muscle and possibility to influence tends to be still our unity. And so how to combine these things into an efficient policy tool, I do not yet have a very clear answer to that.
We're pretty much out of time, so I think maybe if I can just, Mark, if you want to take a couple of minutes to sum up, but if you want to take on the peace process issue, then you can do that too.
Well, I can assure you that I have half a dozen colleagues who are working on this very thankless task all the time at the moment. I don't think it's a particularly propitious time for a breakthrough, so I wouldn't recommend Federica Mogherini to make some bold claims about what she will achieve over the next, in her first 100 days when it comes to relations between Israel and the Palestinians. But it is obviously important, though increasingly less important to the in terms of the regional dynamics compared to all the other problems that we're talking about. But the lives are at stake, historical obligations, and I think we should carry on doing everything. Given that we basically bankroll a very dysfunctional status quo, we should potentially have some more leverage over what's happening. I think there were some, if you look back actually at the last 5 years, it's one of the areas where the EU has something quite big to be proud of in terms of the guidelines, and I think they, it's feeding through to the Israeli debate. It's a rare example of the EU actually exercising some real leverage and using the kind of tools that it has to try and reshape the dynamics in the region. But I'm not going to be holding my breath to any early breakthroughs on that particular topic. I think, but by way of end, I mean, this paper is really designed to provoke people into having a discussion about exactly the sort of things we've been talking about now. It's certainly very short and it's not meant to offer too many answers, but it's more about setting some big questions up which we think need to be discussed openly and honestly. And we hope, as an institution that has roots in a lot of member states and a desire to be more present in Brussels in the future, that we can maybe work with all of you to try and have that conversation over the next period of time. And hopefully it could feed into better policy both in national capitals but also more of there is clearly a real opportunity with new people, new institutions to try and do better in the future, and there's certainly no shortage of problems on the front page of the newspapers every day that we're all trying to grapple with. So I very much hope that we can carry on with you all individually, and if you have any ideas for either events or topics or other sorts of things that you'd like to engage ECFR on, please let us know. And this was obviously a very, very wide discussion, so most of our work will be a bit more focused and a bit more problem orientated, but this is, I think, the start of what I hope will be an interesting and fruitful conversation over the next year. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks everyone for coming.